Thank you for joining us today to discuss strategies for SOX-compliant transport management in SAP. Transport management is a topic that is all too familiar, and with SOX compliance, it's imperative that the entire process be documented without making it more difficult to manage. Today, we will be getting 3 points of view in the management of transports. First, you will hear about SimSoft's product, Transport Manager, which is a component of ControlPanelGRC. Scott Gulick will be discussing how you can automate your entire transport process from end to end. Secondly, you will hear about the trials and tribulations with transport management from one of Symmetry's own basis consultants. And last but not least, you will hear from a testimonial from one of our clients that implemented Transport Manager and the benefits that they experienced. So I see there are a lot of new names online today, so we welcome you to this presentation, and I'd like to introduce you to our first presenter, Scott Gulick. Scott is the Chief Technology Officer of SimSoft Corporation, with responsibility for architecting the ControlPanelGRC solution. Scott is a recognized expert in the field of SAP security and controls with over 12 years of experience in SAP security. His experience includes working for one of the big 4 accounting firms and developing audit tools, including those for segregation of duties. SimSoft Corporation is a sister company to Symmetry, and many of the products that make up the ControlPanelGRC suite were originally developed and used in-house here at Symmetry to make our own, to assist our own basis and security teams. So without further ado, Scott, I'd like to hand it over to you, so take it away.
Thank you, Heather. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. As Heather said, I want to give you kind of an overview of what the transport management processes are and some common challenges that are encountered at a number of customers. As you know, change management is always a big challenge in SAP environments. There's a lot of change going on, and of course, as you go through and process your change, you have transports that are sitting in your quality system that may be untested. These represent a risk to your business. You want to make sure that your transports are moving forward in getting into your production system. If something is untested, you never know if that's going to be gathered up in another transport and sent out of sequence to the production system. That leads to the next point, that sequencing of transport often causes issues during migration processes. You have multiple developers working on projects, could be checking in or out pieces of source code and working on them at the same time. This always presents issues from the basis perspective as they're migrating changes, and anything going out of order may cause a problem when it hits production. What we're hearing from our customers is that their auditors are always asking for more and more documentation. The amount of change documentation that was reasonable for a customer to provide 10 years ago is probably not the same as what it is today. The auditors want to understand what sort of testing is being done, who's validating changes, and understanding the process that is being used to put a change into the production system. And of course, as Chad's going to talk about a little bit today, the basis team is unnecessarily involved in a clerical task of importing changes and validating that approvals have happened properly. So again, with having the basis team be available to process changes, get them imported, which can often happen in the middle of the night, always creates a challenge. What we wanted to talk about now is a little bit of what the auditors are wanting to see. So what are our key controls over SAP transports? First of all, the auditors are wanting to see documentation of all changes. So we want to see, they're wanting to see the testing and validation details, making sure that that appropriate folks in the business have actually seen what the change is and have a sign-off in that change management process. So this is helping ensure business involvement in testing, and it's increasing awareness of system changes. As changes are going through your environment, if reports start changing in the production system and the business isn't aware of it, that can lead to some confusion as to what's going on or why a report is working differently than it previously had. The auditors are also wanting to see an IT management sign-off. So not just the business signing off, but making sure that the IT management is looking at what documentation is coming through and making sure that the documentation maps to what the compliance requirements are. This also allows IT management to give some visibility in prioritization of all the SAP changes. If IT management knows of something that's going on this particular day or weekend, they may want to hold off on forwarding a change to the production system until that situation has passed. So what we find our customers wanting to do is develop an audit-friendly transport strategy, something that helps in that you work with the auditors to understand their suggested requirements. And of course, the auditors are not going to be telling you exactly what to do, but they'll likely give you suggestions and provide you a little bit of guidance. They can't tell you exactly what to do because they need to audit that. So you need to come up with a process that works best. We recommend considering the concept of a change review board, or a CRB. This would represent management from major departments in your organization, and the idea would be that when a change is going to be forwarded through to production, or you're getting that approval for production, you want to notify all of your change review board members and then be able to have a handful of them sign off. So this gets the information out to the business that a change is coming, and requiring a handful of those people, whatever makes sense in your organization, to actually sign off on the change before it gets to the production system. We also recommend implementing a workflow-based process to manage all of your change documentation and approvals. If you use this workflow and you capture all that approval and documentation, it becomes very easy when the auditors come in. Of course, once changes are improved in the workflow, you can actually set them up to be automatically imported into your production system as well, to try to get the basis team out of that mundane process of importing transports. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about a pretty basic compliant transport management strategy. This is pretty similar to what we see at a lot of our customers, but it gives you an idea of what you might do to manage the transports and make sure you're getting appropriate sign-offs. So first, we have a change request that's identified and it's allocated to a developer. A developer is going to process the change. They might be writing a report, changing configuration, whatever that item might be. They're going to then take that change and collapse it into an SAP transport and release it to push it into workflow. The change would then migrate to the quality system. We have about a 50-50 split between our customers that want to have an approval before a change goes to quality and don't want to have an approval. So you might have an approval step in here if you want to have a little more control of what's migrating to your quality system. Once it migrates to quality, the change we want to have reviewed by the developer initially to make sure that the proper return codes were received. So validating that the configuration of that program successfully migrated to the quality system and is working in sort of a basic format. But once that change is done, we need to actually get the change over to the CRB or to appropriate validators in the business to review the change and sign off on it that it's working properly or as expected. Once the change review board signs off, they can forward it, but of course if there's an issue and there's not enough documentation or it's not working as planned, they might return it back to the developer for additional work. The IT management then is going to review that change and sign off on the validity of the documentation, making sure that it's going in the right sequence in terms of other projects that may be going on, so in adjusting those priorities. And then we can have our change migrate to the production system, and again, with an automatic import that simplifies the process and doesn't rely on your basis team to actually pull the trigger to make that change happen. And then the last step is your final change sign-off, which would be your validation that the change has migrated to the production system in this case and is working properly and in line with what the business expectations were. The neat thing when you employ a workflow like this where you are capturing your documentation and approvals, you're in a continuous state of audit readiness. When your auditors come in, they can be providing a sample of transports, and then you can very easily go into the workflow and pull out that documentation to justify what sort of approvals or sign-offs were done before a change migrated to the production system. At this time, I'd like to turn it back to Heather.
Yes, thanks, Scott. As a transition point here, what I'd like to do is go ahead and cover actually one of the questions that came in, since it relates to what Scott has just gone over. Scott, the question is, how many approvals do customers typically have before a change goes to production?
Okay, good. Yeah, good question. Typically, I guess this is going to vary a little bit on the customer side. With larger customers, of course, there tends to be more sign-offs before a change can go to production. We generally see an IT sign-off in that path as we kind of articulated in the workflow here. And with the concept of a change review board, we usually see between 3 and 6 approvals signing off before that change actually migrates. Smaller customers, I think we tend to see that they might have a single approval from a given functional area to basically sign off on the fact that their particular change is reasonable, working properly, and sent forward. And I think Roxanne will have a little bit more feedback on that as she gets into how their company is actually utilizing transport management processes.
Okay, thanks for covering that, Scott. If you want to go, to the slide here, I'd like to introduce Chad Fisher. And Chad is in his 2nd year as a basis consultant with Symmetry Corporation. Along with implementing support packages and enhancement packages, Chad has worked on SAP implementations and upgrades of the ERP, CRM, Portal, and Solution Manager products. For those of you on the line who are new to Symmetry, we are an SAP hosting partner and leading provider of services and support for all of your SAP basis, security, and project consulting needs. So at this time, I'd like to hand it over to Chad. So Chad, you can take it away.
Thanks, Heather. All right. What I'm kind of talking about is using email as a tool for managing transports, kind of the manual way of doing it. And a lot of the reasons that customers use the manual process is maybe they haven't considered a tool for change management, or they don't know about other options. A lot of times, if you had just implemented SAP, or if you've been using it a long time and the process is already in place, these are things that either don't get considered or maybe aren't so much a need for that company. Or if budgeting is a factor, then the manual process is kind of the default process. The transport system is already there. There's just more steps in actually getting the transport through. If auditing isn't a high priority, or if they aren't audited very hard, then maybe there's no need to have additional steps for your change management or a better process. Or if you have a very, very low volume of transports, then it's not so important because you might be only doing 1 or 2 transports a week, and so it's not so much of a hassle. Here I'm going to kind of talk about the best practices for doing it manually. There's a lot of different ways to do it, so this is kind of the best way to do it. As far as emails back and forth, you have to have the developer of the transport or the requester. It can't be the same as the person that puts in the transport, so you need to have at least 2 people. Best way to do it is to have the developer or requester, someone to approve the transport, and usually a basis to put it in. And then the testers would be someone that knows the business process very well to test if those changes are working. For this process, you want to save your emails, mostly because of reference. And if the request was made by a phone call, you want to be able to follow up with an email for auditing purposes too. This kind of shows proof of process to the auditor, and who did what. They want to know that kind of stuff. So it's very important to save your emails in the manual process, so that it kind of creates a lot of emails when you're doing this. This is just kind of a flow of how everything works. I'll kind of go over this. I'll grab a pointer here. All right, so over here, this is kind of your SAP system. You've got three systems: your development, your testing, and your production system. Right here we have the developer who has his list of changes that he's making in development. So he basically makes his changes, and then he wants to release those changes and send them up for testing. Before he does this, he has to request an approval. So these little markers here kind of show like an email back and forth between your kind of change management system here, which is a manual process. So he sends the request to the approver. The approver either approves or denies, and if approved, he sends that to the basis team. The basis team, kind of collects all these approvals, creates a task list, and will send them in to each system depending on what the approval is for. When you send those in, after they're sent in, you want the tester that is familiar with the business process to test that out before moving it either way. Tester's going to let the approver know if everything's working correctly. And you see these little like stoplights up here, which they kind of represent the return code you're going to get when you actually put the transport in. So when the basis team puts these transports in, you'll either get like a return code 0, a 4, or an 8. An 8 is an error, a 4 is a warning. And after they go in, the basis team is going to send an email back to the developer or the approver. Best way to do that is to just send it to both of them so everyone knows kind of what step you're at in the process. If you get a return code 0, usually this is good, and then the approver has an easy time approving this to go back into, or to go up into production. If you get like an 8 or a 4, it usually gets sent back to the developer. He has to make more changes. Normally that creates another transport, and then you're sending in multiple transports through the system, and every single one of those have to be approved by the approver. So you like to have the emails, go between everybody at once rather than sending one email directly to one person and then back, and then you get this huge collection of emails, basically is what you get. So now I'm kind of going to go over kind of the known issues with this. For the developer, a lot of times he might not specify which transport should be applied. If he sends an email, he might forget to put the transport in. If he doesn't know that the approval is required, if the process hasn't been set, or if the developer is new to the team, he might just send out an email directly to the basis person, who's then going to be like, well, are you able to approve this? If you're not, then we need to talk to the approver, send this back. And it kind of gets unclear at some points, and you get a lot of emails going back and forth. Or possibly the developer does not know who the approver is, so they'll talk to who they know, and we have to hunt down the approver so that the transport can be approved to move to the next system. If the approver is unavailable, then we have to hopefully the company has a backup approver that we can talk to that also has authority to approve transports. If they're both unavailable, then you have to wait, obviously. Everyone has vacation time. They're not always going to be available. If the approver does not know who's in charge of doing the transporting, if they don't know who to contact on the basis team, or maybe they just haven't done the process before and they didn't know that they couldn't just send it back to the developer and have them put it in. Because you can't, as I said before, have the requester be the same as the person that's actually doing the transport. Approvers a lot of times forget to include things in the email. They forget to include the transport number, maybe when they wanted it put in or such. There gets to be a lot of confusion. You have to make sure that you have everything in your email. Otherwise, you're going to be sending a lot of emails. If the basis team is unavailable, obviously that's another problem. You're going to have backup for whoever normally puts in the transport. A lot of times we like to create distribution lists so that it just goes out to everybody on the team and you kind of pick up who's available. If basis is unavailable, a lot of times they'll start making phone calls, and after the phone calls, obviously you're going to have to follow up with an email because your auditors are going to be looking for, that proof of process or, who did what. So you'll always need the email, and sometimes the email goes to your junk mail. I've had that happen to me before, in which case you kind of get a lost email. So I a lot of times go back through my junk email and make sure that that's there. You'll get people calling you up like, did this go through? Did this go through? We need this through. And I'll be like, I don't think you sent me anything. And then they'll send another one and you'll find it later. And that can be kind of a hassle. The sequencing can also be another issue. If the developer doesn't specify the order in which they go in, it can cause issues because if they made a fix to a transport they sent in earlier and you transport them in the wrong sequence, then you're just going to have to retransport them later because you didn't fix it. You just sent the fix in before you sent the problem in. And so sequencing can be an issue, and a lot of times they forget to tell us that they need them in a certain order in order for that to work. And you can kind of go on and on. There's, I mean, when you have communication like that, a lot of times you can have some sort of breakdown in communication. If no one specified when the change needs to be put in, then you might be sitting there thinking, does this go in at the same time all these other transports go in, or is this an emergency that needs to go in right now? So you need to start making phone calls and then following up with emails and such like that. And a lot of times emails get misplaced sometimes. You have to make sure everything is flagged correctly. In a common scenario, developers would just send the request to both the bassist and the approver. That way you know what step you're at. Bassist knows that this needs to be approved. It'll say something like, I need this transport to go into the quality system once approved by whoever the approver is. And bassist will see that, and then we'll know that once that's approved, we can send that in. And the approver can approve in one of three ways. They can approve it for immediately, so you get the email, and as soon as you get that and see that, you want to go in and send that transport through. Sometimes, not always, this can happen at really late night, like 1 a.m. in the morning. And you obviously aren't always checking your email, especially when you're sleeping. So they'll have to start calling around. Once you finally get them in the call and you've put everything through, you need to follow up with an email so that your auditors are happy and such. If the approver, they can approve for later that day, which for the basis team, this means that you have to flag all these emails and make sure they're, in the right order so that you know that these go in today. This one already went in. Don't worry about that one for later today. If the approver approves for later in the week or possibly next week, then you have to also flag for that. So as I have here, basis must flag each request depending on how it's been approved. I like to set up rules. We use Outlook, so I set up rules to have certain approvals go to certain folders and such, and then you need to make sure you set the date on when those need to be approved and put it in your task list. And then before importing, you must complete an email scavenger hunt is how we refer to it. Basically, if it's approved in any one of these three ways, you want to make sure that you know that this one's an immediate one's already been done. If it's for later today, you might also have some that have been approved last week that are also for today. So when you go to put in the transports, you kind of have to search through like the last week and a half or 2 weeks and make sure that you've covered all the emails that need to go in for that day. I know I like to have indexing set up on my computer so I can just do a quick search for maybe that date if it's on there, or if I have a lost email, I can just do a quick search on my email to find if that request had gone in. But I don't know if anyone's ever used indexing. That can really slow down your computer quite a bit. But I do like to have it for mainly that purpose. And also, we keep all of our emails for auditing purposes. So that's kind of what I have. I'm going to kind of turn it back to Heather now.
Okay, thank you, Chad. One question that came in during your part of the presentation that I thought we could cover now, well, it's fresh in everyone's mind, and one of them is just asking, in a typical day, how much of your time is consumed by just doing transport?
Well, the basis team here, I mean, obviously transports aren't all we do, and it depends on the company or the client on how many transports or what day it is, even how often the transports have to go in. Typically, if it's like midweek, if we have multiple clients, it can take a good portion of the day. So say it's Wednesday. A lot of times on a Wednesday, I know I have one client that sends all their requests for Wednesday. They want all their changes to be done on Wednesday so that they have Thursday and Friday to make sure everything's okay. That can take anywhere from 10 minutes to a half hour, with all the immediate ones in between and requests from other, for other things. That can take up an additional like 5 minutes every time a request is made, because I have to log into the system, go into the transport management, and actually physically send that in, and then send out the emails. So just even one transport can take just 5 minutes if I'm not already logged into the system. If there's several transports, and especially if they need to be sequenced in a certain order, it can take a good portion of my time. If it's Friday, though, a lot of people don't like to make changes on Friday, so it's not too bad.
Okay.
So that's kind of typically, depending.
Okay. Well, thanks for covering that, Chad, and for covering the manual process that occurs from the basis side without an automated process in place. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Roxanne Morniers. Roxanne is the IT Applications Manager in the Publishing Division of Courier Corporation, and we will see the introduction slide up here momentarily. Roxanne has 6 years experience working with SAP and 10 years with PricewaterhouseCoopers IT Consulting. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Roxanne and let her explain a little bit about Courier Corporation and their SAP system. So Roxanne, take it away.
Thank you. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Get my little highlighter out of the way. Let me explain about Courier Corporation, and excuse me just a moment. I have to get one thing set up. Oops, sorry about this. Okay, Courier Corporation is actually a very old company. It's been around for almost 200 years, and we are headquartered in Massachusetts. We actually have 6 printing plants. We are a printing and publishing company, and we have 3 publishing companies, and those are the companies that are running SAP. For the publishing companies, we have over 10,000 titles in print. We're doing 700 new titles a year. The publishers are Dover Publications, REA, and Creative Homeowners. And this means that we have a very active inventory management issue that we do all through SAP. With our SAP installation for the 3 publishers, we have 4 subsidiaries set up. You can tell that we actually fall into the small to medium enterprise categorization at the very bottom of the category for SAP. The big challenge for us is that our IT staff is really only 4 people, and in addition to supporting SAP, we have a number of other publishing specific applications and a website that we support. One of the ways that we've accomplished this is by outsourcing our basis support, which is done by Symmetry Corporation. Our big challenge is, being as a publicly held company, is to maintain SOX compliance. And since we've gone on SAP for about the first 4 to 5 years, our biggest challenge and the item that kept coming up on the compliance reports is to better manage the change process. And in addition, much as what Chad had said, there's a lot of work and tasks going around just managing the emails and everything else it took to make sure that all of our changes were documented. And we have a number of challenges that I'll highlight here. First thing is what Chad talked about too. We had the issue as well. We had to make sure that we documented all the approvers, all of the approvals, and we would do that by emails, and then going back and trying to find the emails, it would definitely be those email scavenger hunts. We had the issue of trying to sequence multiple transports, that you load them out of, whenever you load those transports out of sequence, it means that you've got additional work to do. Yeah. We needed to engage the business users for testing and approval. That was always a big challenge for us, and that has to do with, we would try approaches like begging or nagging, reminding them. Candy seemed to work pretty well. Another problem we had was making sure that the basis staff was available to do the transports. Chad talked about the error reports and the error codes that come up. For us, with our basis support being remote, sometimes we weren't actually paying attention to the fact that there is an error code on a transport. We'd be testing away and thinking that our own work didn't work when actually it was a problem with how something went across on a transport. So it was really that it was more like the invisibility of the error codes for us. Another problem was just keeping track of the documentation that was done, whether it was test plans or documenting what the actual fix was going to be. Keeping track of all of that, we might make really great notes, but 2 weeks later it would be into obscurity and we wouldn't be able to find what documentation we did. The other thing for us, a challenge, would be tracking the work done by our consultants. We do have a cadre of wonderful consultants who help us with development, ABAP work, and config work, and they would create transports and send us emails that it was ready to start testing, and if those emails got lost in the junk file or wherever they went, then we would lose track of those and start working on something else and maybe overwrite their work. So that was an area of challenge for us. So we decided that we really needed to address this problem both from the SOX compliance issue and then our own productivity. And we decided to go with an automated workflow, and we, as you can tell since I'm here, we decided on the ControlPanelGRC transport management system. There are other solutions available, but this one was nicely integrated. It's an SAP add-in, so we work with it just by running a T-code from our SAP menu. It is configurable. We've done another number of workflow processes that serve to manage different kinds of changes. Big thing here is that we are ensuring the correct approval streams and we're documenting them. And we have a place to put that additional reference documentation so it doesn't get lost anymore. So here's an example of our most used workflow. And you can see here that we've got phases up at the top here. There's actually, let me see if I can get that pointer back. There we Okay, so we have here phases. We've numbered them. There's spaces in between them so that we can add in more things, but really this is one standard workflow we use for change management for a business tester, where we have to have a business user test things. And you can see by the descriptions the different kinds of tasks here. The main thing to pay attention to here, I think, is the phase type. The fact that we have migration phases. That's where we want Control Panel to, during that phase, actually migrate it from development to QA, or down here from QA into production. We also have a phase owner. So whoever is the developer would be the phase owner for all the phases, except where we've assigned a group. So we have a test. Our user testers are all listed here, who are approved owners that can sign off on a change, and we have a project manager approval here, and then our CIO approval. And then here we can define our collision checks. That's where we ask, we run an SAP transaction. Actually, Control Panel runs it for us to make sure that our transports aren't conflicting with similar work already done or something that's in progress. So this workflow helps us advance the changes across the SAP landscape as well as the business landscape. And I think the path is a little easier to see in this diagram. Okay. So this is a swim lane diagram, and you can see that the departments generally are our IT department, our business users, our project management, that's me. The senior management would be our IT CIO. And up here on the swim lane for the Control Panel GRC Transport Manager, we have all those phases represented and the process in which they go. And you can see here how they would move a transport across the landscape. So phase 25 goes from development to QA, and then 55 goes in from QA, it takes it to production. An email, automated emails are sent to notify each next person who owns the task that the task is now ready for them to take over, whether it's documentation or testing. And then each octagonal shape here represents a checkpoint within Control Panel where they need to document what they're doing and what their approval is. So how do we start a change request? The workflow starts in when a change request or correction is ready to be released into the development box for testing. So when you're ready to create a transport, not create a transport, when you're ready to release it. We can group one or more transports into one request, and we can describe what the work is to be done. At the time that the developer chooses which workflow to use, they have a choice. I've been showing you the workflow that's really for business user testers, but we also have a workflow for technical items, so it's things that the business user wouldn't normally know. Let's say that we're doing a patch or a GUI upgrade. We're working now on a new workflow for assigning new users. That's not using transports, but it's just another way to use the workflow. Another way we're using the workflow in the Control Panel product is to send basis requests over, and that way it's documented, the approval is documented. So if we have to change the schedule on a batch job, we put it on we've made a workflow for it, and we can just send the request through, and it just has worked out really well for us. We also just finished a 6.0 upgrade project last month, and we made a new workflow just for that project that had 2 Pro migration phases from Mock Pro and Pro, so that we could send everything to our production box as a test, as a mock go live, and then when we were ready for go live, we still had another migration place, and the attendant approvals needed. It was already in the workflow, and that worked out really well for us. When a change request is started, the workflow manages the approval process for us. But first off, we asked the IT person to go in and document what the problem was, what the solution is, if there's any special instructions like, oh, there's a role request that's also needed, or master data. The request gets approved for migration to QA, and we've got a batch job for this kind of migration that runs every 15 minutes. And this little matchstick down here, it identifies which phase is active. So you can see here that it's the QA migration phase that's ready. So documenting the approvals was one of our tough compliance issues, and this is an area that's really been helped by putting in this workflow product. The workflow manages the approvals for us, and you can see that we have approvers here done for the business user sign-off, and we have the project manager sign-off, and then this is the CIO sign-off. In each case, it tells us who was the person that did the sign-off, and in this case, it's sitting in the approval in the email bucket for the CIO to approve. Once he signs off on it, his name would actually go here instead of the user group. And then we have, for production migration of these transports, we have a batch job that we set up to go at 5:30 every night. If we have an emergency transport that needs to go through, we can override it. And if we want to delay a request and say queue them up to all go on Sunday afternoon at 5:30, we can also do that. The great thing for us is that the basis staff is no longer involved in moving the transports. We control it from our side, and it's done by scheduled batch jobs. So it's predictable, and the basis staff is freed up for other tasks. And you can see here that right within the control panel request, we can see how the transports went through and if there's any return code errors. So this here, we got the red light showing us what happened, and it has the return code 8 or return code 4. It's very visible for us, whereas before it was something that we didn't always see. The documentation provided by this is terrific. This is just a sample of the printout a report that goes for any change management request. Oh, sorry about that. So we have all our changes, all of our approvals, all the issues, and they're all in one place. It's now a lot easier to manage the changes. I can run reports that show us changes in progress by user, by what phase they're in, by the status of them, who changed them last. I can easily find out what requests haven't been approved yet, so I can move things along in a more timely manner. And the changes by our outside consultants are now put into request. I can see those, and we have full documentation for those as well. So we have put this in place. It's worked out really well, and we had some unexpected benefits from it. The IT staff now has more time because we're more organized. We're no longer doing the scavenger hunts or tracking down approvals or looking for availability of whether it's the approver or the basis staff. Surprisingly, we trained our business users on using Control Panel Transport Manager, the ones that can do the final approval, not every business user, but just the ones that do the approval process. And they actually like it, and we found a lot more willingness on their part to jump in and do the approvals. And our basis team has more time because they're no longer moving the transports and creating or maintaining the users and the roles, which we're working on that part now, but we think that's going to be a big win for us. And of course, the auditors are happy. We finished our audit 2 months ago, and just checking in with our auditor, he said it was the fastest audit we've had. It wasn't that they stopped and looked at every control panel request. They just saw that we had it, and they took all the information, and there's been no questions. So we consider that a big win. So Heather, I think that wraps up my piece. Why don't we go to some questions?
Okay, well, thank you to everyone, Scott, Chad, and Roxanne. At this time, if any attendees have questions for any of the presenters, you can type them into the GoToWebinar side panel. And while we wait for those questions to come in, I'd like to cover one question that we always receive, and that is people ask, will a recording of this presentation be made available? And yes, a recording of the presentation will be available, and we will make sure everyone receives a link to that presentation via email this week. So moving on to questions, I see that some of them are coming in. And Roxanne, since you just finished from your perspective on the Transport Manager tool, we have a few questions here that that you could probably answer since you are users of the tool. So the first one is, what happens if your transport doesn't solve the problem and you have to make another change? How is that handled in the workflow?
Oh, that is a good question, and of course that happens. The developer would go ahead and, since the transports had already been released, they have to make a new transport for their config or their ABAP code. And when they've done the basic testing for that in development and they're ready to release it, when they release it, Control Panel Transport Manager pops up a request window, and you can either assign it to a new request or you can assign it to your existing request. So we can take a request that's made it all the way up to, say, QA, and we can step it backwards to dev, pick up the new transport, we can put it in the correct order for sequencing purposes, and then start the workflow over again and get it into the right approval and tester stream.
Okay, great. Another question that Roxanne, you can probably address fairly easily is, what if an approver isn't available? So if they go on vacation or can't log into SAP in time, how is that handled?
Great. Yep, that does happen too. You saw that we had the different groups that we set up for approval. So let's say in the case of the CIO approval, if he's out of the office, if he knows that he's going to be out, he signs on to Control Panel for that user group, which he's the manager of, and he can add another name onto it. And that way, as the requests go through, another person can take over. He'll still see in his email box that those requests are coming through, but they can be signed off by another person in the group that he's got control over. If for some reason he's not around, or if he's out unexpectedly and can't get into SAP to do that, then we have some administrative override rights that we can add someone in for him. So that would be the way that we do that.
Okay, well, thanks for covering that. I think those are real-life situations and questions, so that helps. Another question here, and Scott, you may want to address this one. The question is, technically speaking, how is Transport Manager integrated in the SAP landscape? Is it with Soulman, or can we install in one of the ECC or CRM systems? So if you could elaborate on that.
Sure. Thanks, Heather. Yes, you do have the option of how you want to integrate this in your landscape. And just to use Courier as the example, Roxanne had discussed the upgrade that they had just gone through. Before that upgrade, they had the Transport Manager software living in their ECC environment. It was a 4.7 environment at the time. But as part of the upgrade, they chose to move it into Solution Manager and remotely manage their target system, in this case, ECC. So you have that option of running it in Solution Manager or running it directly in the target system. And Heather, I can grab a couple of the other technical questions here as well.
Okay,
another question was, can we explain the collision check? So Roxanne had discussed how they use the collision check to help them identify instances where there might be transports about to override each other. The way that the collision check works is that at specific times that you designate in the workflow configuration, a collision check can be run to look at the items that are contained in your transport from both a workbench and a configuration entry perspective and compare it to other in-flight transports or modifiable transports in your environment. So if someone is about to forward a program change or a configuration change that conflicts with something that is either being maintained in development or currently being tested in the quality system, that's where the collision check would be identifying that and giving the person the ability to be able to see those. A couple other questions. I'm going to defer this one to Roxanne. How hard is it to configure a workflow change?
Oh, great. Sorry, I have a feeling that people are not seeing my screen now. Is that true?
We are seeing your screen.
Yes.
Oh, and it's not exactly where I want it to be. I wonder if, Heather, you can take the screen back?
Sure, I can take...
I'm not getting a response here, and I don't think people want to see this. my face for the whole answer. Scott, could you ask the question again, please?
Sure. It was how hard is it to configure workflow changes?
You know, it wasn't hard at all. It was a little challenging at first understanding all the options that are there. But once we figured that out, I've now set up many different workflows on my own. And we have a chance to do some testing with them before we put them into production. So that's worked out really well.
Okay, thank you. Another question, how much effort will it take to set up Transport Manager in a new environment? And Roxanne can speak to this, but this is something that can be implemented in less than a day. The hard part is understanding what your change management strategy is going to be. So kind of where I was discussing the various approval phases along the way and so forth, that tends to be the challenge. But the technical aspect of getting this up and running is very easy, and in a very short period you could be sending changes to your target systems. Another question that had come in here was what SAP modules are required to be configured for use with ControlPanelGRC? Is it self-contained? Yes, this is self-contained. So you're basically utilizing our workflow engine. It's not an SAP workflow engine. So if you can process transports via STMS today, if your basis team can send those changes, Transport Manager will sit directly on top of that and manage that process for you. Getting more questions than I anticipated today. Another question here is, do we have a rollback option for transports? Yes, we do. You have the ability to create rollback transports. It's not, from a procedural perspective, it's not something we recommend for a variety of reasons, but the capability is there. Another question came in, what makes ControlPanelGRC better than Solution Manager? So in the context of Transport Manager, comparing it to, say, Charm, first of all, simplicity. So as Roxanne was saying, that you know, it's pretty easy to adjust your workflows. This also doesn't really change your process. As you know, when you use the Charm solution, you do have to change the way your transports are going to work, and that you're creating things in Solution Manager, creating transports in Solution Manager that then are available for use inside of your development systems, and it's taking away some of your flexibility. So for those of you who have used the Charm solution, this is a significantly more flexible model, but still allows you to do groupings into projects, which is one of the nice things in Charm. So we have that capability to put project transports below or together to make sure they're migrating in the right sequence. Another question, if we have multiple transports on a request and one of them fails, do the subsequent transports continue on? That's a configurable option. In most cases, customers do set it up that way, with the intent being that if we're sending a transport to a target system, we want it to migrate all the way through. So if I send a program to the quality system and it fails, and I'm sending a second transport with the correction to it, most customers want both of those changes to migrate together to the production system. So in that scenario, you would want them both to go in the transports to roll on or continue on once the failure is identified. Another question, and I think this is for Roxanne. How hard is it to implement the automated process, and were there any change management issues for you?
Okay. It was not that hard to set it up once we decided what we wanted it to be. Because we don't do a lot of transports, when we first set this up well over a year ago, the IT staff wasn't using it very much. So it took a while. You know, you have to practice to use some of this stuff. So it took a while for them to get used to the idea. And now it's not a problem at all. The second part of the question was?
Any change management issues. And Roxanne, if I could just add to your comment there, I think that you guys had a number of discussions internally as to how you wanted the process to work. I think that was the complexity.
Yeah, we did. Just trying to figure out who was going to be able to do the final change or the final sign-off at the different phases, particularly around the business users. We might have a change that's to, let's say, some aspect of the way the order entry screen would look, and because we have multiple companies using it, we would want everyone in the multiple companies to test it, you know, a representative from each group, but we really only have a place for one person to do the final sign-off on it. So we had to decide how exactly we were going to do that. That took some questions, but we did figure that out.
We're kind of running out of time here. We actually have a number of questions left, so we're going to have to take these offline, and we'll follow up individually with the appropriate person.
Okay.
So
well,
this time, Heather, I'll turn it back to you since we are out of time.
Okay. Thanks, Scott, and Roxanne for answering those for us. We'd like to thank everyone for participating today in the presentation. We will have the recording available online later this week. So again, thank you for your time today, and have a great day. Thanks.